I'm going to talk about two exhibitions in Manhattan that are up now. One of them is closing tomorrow, and the other is up till October. These are both shows by Richard Avedon. I didn't expect to feel so compelled to want to talk about two exhibitions by Richard Avedon, but in both cases, I've been bowled over by the experience of seeing the works in person. And so I'm not going to talk about the shows as like a review. I'm not going to focus too much on each of the photographs in the shows because there's tons of information about the content of Avedon's photographs. But it's really hard to find information about the details surrounding how these artworks came into being, both on the exposure side, what Avedon was doing when he sat down to make a picture, and what he did with his negatives to print these photographs and to prepare them for exhibition. So the first show is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the name of this show is Murals. There are 3 very large photographic murals in that show and a handful of smaller prints that support and supplement what was going on when he was making those larger prints. And then the show that's closing tomorrow is at Gagosian Gallery on 21st Street, and that's Avedon at 100, because if Avedon were alive today in 2023, he would be 100 years old. That show has a ton of work in it, and if you're seeing this now, and hopefully this gets posted in time, you should go see that show. There are so many works of art, and there are so many different modes of picture making that Avedon pursued throughout his career that are present in that show. And at Gagosian, all of the prints in that show, and there must be, I mean, there's got to be like 100 photographs. No, it's got to be more than 100 photographs. There's over 100 photographs in the show. They're all prints made in his lifetime. So none of them are new technology, or none of them are technology that, that didn't exist alongside the process of Avedon making the photographs. And I say that because it's really important to be aware of the fact that when Avedon was making his pictures, when he was setting out to do these projects, he was aware of the technology that existed to print these images, and he pushed that technology as far as he could. But being aware of that technology allowed him to make pictures that could embrace the full expanse of what existed photographically. Okay. So let's take a look at the Avedon Murals show. This is what it looks like when you enter the exhibit, and you can see Warhol and you can see Joe D'Alessandro larger than life. And when you step in to the gallery, a couple images here to give you a sense of scale, you can see how enormous these images are. These are silver gelatin prints, which means they are made in the darkroom. They are fiber-based paper that has been coated in light-sensitive silver gelatin emulsion and then exposed to the negatives through a very large enlarger in the darkroom with Avedon's supervision. I think they might have been made at Modern Age, which was a photo lab that existed at the time. It's possible these were supervised by or guided by Rudy Hoffman, who was Avedon's master printer for the images from the American West. But in any event, these are not inkjet prints. These are not digitally produced prints. Every detail on these images has been crafted by hand. So let's talk about how that happens. You can see that there are 3 panels here, and they're made up of 3 different 8x10 negatives. Now, what you're seeing there, if you're not used to looking at an 8x10 negative, you see this black border. Each black border indicates one singular exposure on an 8x10 inch negative. That's the kind of camera Avedon was using to make these pictures. That's the kind of camera that Avedon made his American West photographs with. Many of the photographs he made from roughly the middle of his career towards the end of his career were made with that camera. Okay, giant negative. It provides a ton of detail. That amount of detail, of course, allows for him to enlarge these to the scale that they are. I don't know the exact measurements of these murals, but based on the gentleman standing there in this photograph, based on being in that room, I'm guessing that these are roughly 1 inch to 1 foot. So each of those panels is, the enlargements themselves, is 8 by 10 feet. The size of the paper, of course, you can see is larger. So we're looking at roughly something that's, you know, each sort of panel tapestry is maybe 14 feet high, 12 feet high, something like that. They are dramatic prints. In order to make these, you would have to have an enlarger that could project the negative at a distance big enough so that it could become that large. And we think about enlargers, usually they're above and they project downward. This is so big that the enlarger had to be turned on its side and light had to be passed through it and projected against a wall. Modern age, that lab had that capability. Very few labs have that capability. Certainly now, then even. Each of those panels now we're looking at an 8 by 10 foot enlargement. There's no paper that exists that big. And so each of these panels is composed of strips of silver gelatin paper that were placed on the wall, but one singular image was projected on it. Now, whether this was done piece by piece or whether this was done all at one time, I'm not sure. I don't know if they had a wall essentially that was big enough that would allow them to project a full 8 by 10, but they definitely had a wall that was big enough that would allow them to hang a piece of paper that is the length of the top to bottom of that mural and probably about 36 inches wide, maybe 42 inches wide. The reason for that is because the paper came on a roll and it was only that length. It was only that width, roughly 42 inches wide, somewhere in there. Ilford, Agfa, Kodak, that's as wide as they made the roll, because all those rolls would get cut down into sheets of paper that would get filled into their boxes for traditional standardized sizes like 4 by 6 or 5 by 7 inch paper, 8 by 10 inch paper, 16, 20, 11 by 14, etc., etc. Okay. So once the exposure is made on that huge strip of paper, we're saying 36 inches wide by 12 feet long, then that has to be processed. And the only way to process that would be in chemicals by hand. And the only way to do that, the only technology that existed was to tray develop it, meaning you need to have huge trays, or you would use these troughs. And you would take the paper, you'd roll it up, and then you'd roll it into a trough filled with chemicals. The trough was wide enough, and then you would roll it back on itself. And so it would move through those chemicals, emulsified through the entire surface of the paper, allowing it to all get agitated within the chemicals. You move it in and out, and you have to time it. It was a very complicated process. It's a process that would happen automatically in a color processor if you were making color enlargements that were also analog light-based enlargements. And all of that would be timed by the machine. But here they had to be done by hand. All of this is to say that this is an enormous endeavor. To do all of this by hand, to be able to make sure that each section of these panels was processed, no, was exposed the same, and then processed the same. Just imagine it. Do you think you could do it? There aren't a lot of people around today that even have this skill set because digital technology has completely taken over. It has made it unnecessary to to have those skills because we can scan a negative. We can put that negative directly into our computer through a drum scan or a flatbed scan, and we can make an inkjet print. There are also digital to analog machines that can use an optical process to print onto light-sensitive paper, the way that this is light-sensitive. But what that means is that in all of these technologies, anyone that's used Photoshop, you can go in, you can do your dodging, your burning, you can mask, you can add, subtract, you can do whatever you want in Photoshop, and then you can output that. And of course, we know that there are gigantic inkjet printers that you could make huge murals like this out of. None of that would be light sensitive. None of that would be made in a darkroom. And of course, it's entirely repeatable as long as the machine that you're using to output your print on is consistent, is kept up, is taken care of, then you can print these over and over again. But these prints, every single thing about them had to be done by hand. Even putting the paper on the wall in order to make sure it was flat so that it could receive the projection of the negative had to be perfect. Okay, let's break this down even further. This is the bottom of one of the tapestries. This is the bottom of the print. And you can see that we have a small dent in the corner where the silver gelatin coating has been cracked because the edge of that maybe got knocked somewhere. But what's behind that is a bunch of thread. You can see it there sticking out. And that thread is where the backing of this large mural is revealing itself. That print is mounted to canvas. The canvas backs the entire silver gelatin print. It makes it malleable and it makes it durable. So here, up here, is the silver gelatin print, which is backed with canvas. And then here, it appears to be a piece of mylar. And my guess is that this mylar has been adhered to the back of the print, maybe 10 inches down, 12 inches down, some length that reaches from the top down the back to give support to the mural, and that can hold the weight of the mural. And then that mylar is wrapped around the back of something that's then adhered to the wall. And that maybe what's adhered to the wall is some kind of plexiglass that's then screwed into the wall, holding the mylar flat against it. So there is distinct weight distribution across the entire top of the mural so that it hangs evenly. Just that alone, just that technical awareness, the skill to kind of piece through all of that is fascinating to me. It's not just a mounted picture in a frame. There are plenty of mounted pictures and frames that Avedon made, but it is a unique exhibition decision. It's a model for exhibiting these totally unique prints and prints that had not been formally made before. And so in that sense, when we look at these prints by Avedon and we see that they're fiber-based prints, backed on linen, canvas, and then again backed with some sort of hanging device. And we can see, furthermore, that there are kind of wrinkles and waves in this print, in these mural prints at the museum. You can see that the paper has character to it, which again makes the whole experience feel like it's an object, like it exists in space, like it's occupying the room that we're in. It's not a projection, that just disappears the minute the light is turned off. It's physical. It's not a sculpture, but it occupies space the way a sculpture does. And so looking at these details also gives you the sense that these objects are aging, which is fascinating because they look incredibly beautiful. This show at the Met is up till October 1st, I think, so I highly recommend that you go and see it. But to be able to see all these details and to be in the room with these prints is remarkable. But each of those panels that we now know is made up of multiple parts that are glued together. And from a distance, it's seamless. If you walked into the room and you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't see it. That's how good it is. You wouldn't see it. And it's the same way for many other prints that Avedon made that are large, but that aren't these mural prints. There are other prints, especially in this Gagosian show, that are made up of multiple panels glued together to create the sense that this is a singular exposure. I mean, it is a singular exposure, but the truth of the technology wouldn't allow it, not at the time. So again, if we look here at this Warhol, here's the Candy Darling image we were just looking at. That's Paul Morrissey there, Paul Morrissey there, Paul Morrissey there. Joe D'Alessandro here, Joe D'Alessandro there. Again, that like repetition in these murals is pretty fascinating, that Avedon was sort of conceptualizing of not only the singular image being created, but using these multiple images in the same way that cinema functioned, where you could have a character leave the frame and then come back and clearly like something has happened to that character from one frame to the next. That sort of thing is, you know, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, poetic use of still photography, and the experience of being a viewer and being able to go back and forth and like notice and recognize that there is time passing. So here is the mission council image, and you can see the seam here, and then here's a break where we've got two different negatives. So again, we're seeing the same person photographed twice, side by side. There's a psychological effect occurring here with this repetition. It's a callback of sorts. We see someone in one moment, we see them again in another moment. Although they are very similar, there is a sense that they're being seen twice. The notion of being seen twice is highly important in photography. It goes back to that same idea of what's happening cinematically in the Warhol image. Although these are subtle moments, they make you reconsider your understanding of the person. They give you a separate perspective on the human being that you're looking at. And of course, Avedon is trying to sort of make these photographic decisions that can be used to see layers of information about these groups that aren't readily available on the surface, but that do require some time to kind of dig into and understand. Let's take a look at the Mission Council mural that's across the hall at the Met, from the Warhol image. So here it is, and in this case, instead of horizontal compositions, the way that the Warhol image is, there's three separate exposures. In the Warhol one, 8 by 10, 30 feet across. If this is roughly 1 inch to 1 foot, we're looking at 8 panels across. Each panel is 8 feet. This is probably about 40 feet or so, but you know, looking at this now, it's probably not quite 10 feet tall, but they're very large. I mean, you could essentially be looking at roughly 40 feet long by 10 feet tall, you know, again, 12 feet overall. But take a look at what we're seeing here. I mean, there is no glass in front of these murals. The Met has installed these little metal guardrails that go up to your calves. You know, maybe they hit your shin. There is nothing getting in the way of you seeing these prints. And they are hanging on the wall just like a tapestry would, just like fabric would. You can see that there's some curl underneath. We can even zoom in here, and you can see that the paper is sort of moving a bit. You can clearly see the different panels and how they're hanging together. Each panel, of course, is indicative of one exposed negative, as I mentioned before. And here you can see, you know, they're not perfectly lined up at the bottom. Because they're hanging this way, the paper is allowed to breathe, and that's a highly important thing to remember, is that, you know, this paper, it being fiber-based, it expands and contracts with the moisture in the air, with the temperature of the air. And the idea that Avedon decided to let these photographs kind of live this way, it makes the experience of seeing them even more dramatic. Because if we look at this, we're really looking, can we do this? Yeah, we're really looking at bodies that are larger than life. These are almost twice full size. And the way that they fit in the room, it feels physical. It feels like they're not necessarily imposing on you, but they are standing there judging you the same way that you're judging them. Avedon was very concerned with making sure that the viewer understood that everything happening within the frame happened all at one time, and that Avedon was aware of that. One thing for sure about Avedon is that he really wanted to make sure that people understood how competent he was, how skilled he was, and that none of these things that we're looking at here could happen without it being Avedon doing it. I think that has a lot to do with photography as a medium. I think that there's, you know, a certain anxiety in the medium of photography that photographers are relying too much on technique or on technology in order to achieve what we're seeing on the wall. And I think Avedon made a lot of choices over the years to try and defeat that or compete with that that notion. And these two shows successfully document that. Let's look at the Gagosian show. And here's a mural that is not at the Met show. This is at the gallery on 21st Street. And there's two things you'll notice right away. First of all, Gagosian has installed a large glass wall in front of the mural. Now, they did a nice job with it. It's not terribly obstructive, but it is very present. That is a giant wall that is saying, keep back, stand back, don't get anywhere near this. That's an extraordinarily different experience than seeing these at the Met, which is why I highly recommend the experience of seeing these murals at the Met, because it is such an unusual, remarkable, fantastic experience. Okay, so this mural also is just two panels. It's two 8x10s horizontally held side by side. There's also the same Warhol image hanging at Gagosian. Let me show you that. Here's the same mural, likely made at the same time as the one at the Met. And all of the same panels, the way it's constructed, it's the same. This is the image that's on their website. I didn't take the time to photograph this one in the gallery, but there is less texture to the print in terms of where the canvas backs it than in the one in the Met. But as you can see, there is roughly 30 feet, 40 feet of glass that prevents you from getting close to the print. And it's still nice the way that they handled it. It doesn't curl up at the bottom the way the Metropolitan Museum of Art's print or edition of this does. It sits more flat, and that could be because of the way it's been stored. It could be that they decided to roll it in reverse in order to prevent it from curling at the bottom for this exhibit. I don't really know the answer to that. But these prints are the same, like the same details, the same qualities, the same sort of tones in the prints. They're pretty identical. Obviously the grain and all that is the same. And again, kudos to the printer of these to be able to match this. Because again, and this is what's fascinating about this, is that each of those murals, 1, 2, 3, the panels in that mural, which make up singular exposures on an 8x10 negative, each one of those is comprised of roughly 4 different photographic prints in the darkroom. That's 4 different sheets of photographic paper that have had to be exposed to light through the negative. They had to be exposed for the same amount of time, and they had to be processed in the same developer and the same chemicals for the same amount of time so that there is even quality across each of those individual panels. That is a very difficult process to master. And the fact that we're seeing 2 of the same murals exhibited in the same city at the same time, and that they look this uniform without computer intervention, without digital technology, without inkjet printing, where all you have to do is push a button and all the masks and dodging and burning and all the stuff you've done to clean up your photograph is all saved in a file. All of that has to be done by hand in a darkroom. As I mentioned, this show is filled with so many images. It's really incredible how many different eras of Avedon's work are present in this show. There are images that were made at the very beginning of his career that are beautiful, and the prints are beautiful. You know, piggybacking off of what I was describing at the Met, the way in which these prints are made, the refined quality, and the control with which Avedon has over all aspects of the medium, this show at Gagosian takes that even further, because in addition to being all of these amazing exposures, these moments and compositions that Avedon has created over the years, the way in which they're presented is all very unique. So let's take a look at a quick video of one of the rooms of the install. So here's what it looks like in the gallery. This is just one aspect of it. There are a few of these sort of windows cut into the walls, and the insides of these windows have been painted black. And the experience of looking through the square window is very similar to the experience of what Avedon's prints look like that he might have shot with his Rolleiflex or Hasselblad. And so I think the gallery, the sort of designers of the exhibition space did a really nice job at creating these little portholes around the space so that we can see photographs through the walls, photographs from different eras of his work, layered from earlier or later eras. And this is a good example of that. Let's look at another one. Okay, so here is another view of the exhibition, and this is pushed way back to the other side of the gallery, and we're now looking through this other window. And you can see on the right, we've got some iconic Avedon images. On the left, we've got the iconic images that he made of his father. Some of them were made earlier in his father's life, and then some of them were made right before he died. And you can see again that these are square frames. They look like this window that's been made. The experience of being in the gallery, again, you push through these spaces, you're given this opportunity to see all of this other work that Avedon has created. And again, there are hundreds of images. It's really incredible. On the back wall there, those are all politicians that Avedon photographed with his 8x10. These, you know, incredibly famous, so famous they're basically banal images of the Beatles, but also the Dalai Lama on the left. And if you look right to the left, you can see the 2 images from the Met at contact print size. That's the Mission Council and the 7. That's Michael Jordan on the right, and then Prince and Patti Smith. Here's another view of the show looking to the right, and you can see here that, again, you have a variety of really beautiful images. That image on the very left of the screen is one of the early images that Avedon made with a Raleigh Flex, and that's Coney Island. I think that's Coney Island, but super grainy, really beautiful moment that's captured here. This little child standing on their father's arm, reaching up. But then, that's next to all of these other incredible images. There's Picasso's children up on the right. There's an image here. Let's play this and see. You might recognize, obviously some of these people because they're all pretty well known. There's the Warhol in the back, and then here's Mission Council. Those are 8x10 contact prints, so that's the literal size of those negatives that have been made. You can compare that with what we saw before. There was an image previously of Salman Rushdie. And then again, the images of Marvin Israel, his father, on the left. And then if we push through this window like we did before, you can see there are images from the American West. Let's take a look at some of the images. This is the Gagosian website. I'm just going to use their install photographs for a minute. You can see here that this is the pushed in view from where I was standing before. And inside that room there are all images from Avedon's American West project. And you can tell in this image that they have painted the entire inside of that room black, and then they have these spotlights that are on the prints. Let's talk about the prints for a second. There are two on the outside of this room, one on the left and one on the right, you can see here. And I've covered this before in my sort of description of Laura Wilson's book, but these pictures are made very simply in terms of what's going on in front of the camera. It's white paper, tacked up, nailed up, taped up, whatever, to a wall, and these people are standing in front of them. The majority of this work, the way that this work looks, the reason it looks the way it does, there's two things. One, Avedon's ability to find these people, to contact them, to sort of talk to them and get them engaged with being in the photograph, how he talks to them while they're standing in front of the camera. That's a big part of this. Two, of course, is his ability to use the 8x10 camera, his understanding of where to put the bottom of the frame, where to put the top of the frame. Sometimes it might seem sort of loose. It might seem a little bit, sometimes people say that the camera's a little bit thoughtless when it comes to where it is. People talk about feet getting cropped, heads getting cropped, whatever. But in these cases, that looseness always leads to a kind of ease with which we can access the people that are in these photographs. Okay, so his use of the camera, which is made possible primarily by the fact that he has assistants with him. This is a big camera. He's usually traveling with two camera assistants that help him set the camera up, put the white paper up while he's talking to the subjects, while he's sort of thinking about how he's going to make these pictures work. Once all that's up, the only thing they're doing, these American West photographs are all daylight, so the only thing they're doing is either softening the light, potentially with a scrim, or creating some shadow so that it's an open shadow image, so there's not hard light on them. You'll notice that in all these images we've looked at, especially the murals, there's no shadows on the background. It's even hard for me to describe how that's possible. I think a lot of that, so that leads to the third thing that's really important here. Number three is what happens in the darkroom. How the negative that Avedon has created is printed is a gigantic part of what is going on in these American West photographs. And I think this is a really beautiful installation of this work. To see as many of these as there are at one time it's pretty magical. The gallery did a really great job at creating a sort of temple of sorts for where these American West photographs are. The thing about these that's different than the murals is that they're mounted to aluminum. this border back here is metal. It really allows for this image to have a super, super flat presentation. And with the spotlights that are on these images, it's highly dramatic. It feels cinematic even, as if they're projections, but they're not. They're darkroom prints, and they have all of the beauty and detail of the mural prints I described earlier, but on a smaller scale. Even though these are giant prints, in relationship to the murals, they're smaller. This is an image I made in that room, just accentuating the darkness of the room so that we could see the detail of this image. And this is one of those images that Avedon made that's just magnetic, it's dramatic, and the body language of this person, the texture of their clothing, the hair, their skin, all of this stuff draws you in. But then you look at his finger, which is just delicately touching the edge of the frame. You talk about being aware of your camera. You talk about being aware of the tools that you're using when you're making an exposure of a portrait. I mean, you know, over and over again, each of these pictures has something really dramatic about it. You know, it's just that moment that pulls you in. And in addition to that, we've got his face. And let's zoom in. It's not the best quality image, but I think it's really important to talk about this for a minute. This is an 8x10 image. There's tons of detail in here. We know that he's not using strobes. How are his eyes, even though they're deep set under those brows, how are they so light? How is it possible that we can see his blue eyes so clearly in this image? And the reason that's possible is because when these images are being printed, the printer, in this case Rudy Hoffman, while the light is being projected onto the paper and the photosensitive emulsion on the surface of that paper is reacting to the light, Rudy is going in and he's dodging. He's preventing light from hitting certain areas on the eyes and on the cheeks, potentially on the forehead, potentially on around the lips and the nose. He's making sure that there's not too much light hitting those areas so that the details that 8x10 negative has clearly rendered, because there's so much detail, he's doing that so that those details can be seen, they can be revealed. He's holding back certain parts of the exposure of that print so that we can experience the exposure the way Avedon wants us to experience it. And then he's increasing the exposure to certain areas by burning it in. Perhaps the area on the forehead, which would likely be a lot brighter because that's sun, that area has been burned in. More exposure in the darkroom. And the hair, more exposure in the darkroom. Perhaps the area around the neck here, even though that it's clearly in shadow, perhaps that area has been darkened just a little bit so that the face stands out. Or the face has been dodged a bit so that it stands out. It's possible that some of the areas on the jeans here, which have all this amazing detail, there's a lot of mud on these jeans and on his skin here. Perhaps some of these areas have been dodged and burned so that we can see those sections. In Photoshop, we would go in and make masks, and this could be repeated over and over again by simply hitting print. But in the darkroom, you had to be really particular. And whatever you were doing on all of these different sections, and you can go back and you can look at Laura Wilson's book and you could see how specific Avedon was when he was giving directions on the areas that should be brought out, the areas that should be darkened and lightened. You can see how specific he was because he wanted it to look the way he envisioned it to look. And he knew that he could do that work in the darkroom. He knew that he could talk to his printer and get that to happen. And every single one of these prints from the American West, but all of the prints are like that. Here's another one. Same situation. You can see the images talked about reflecting in the plexiglass that's on the front of this. But if we zoom in, you can see all the beautiful detail in her face, all of these freckles, which are tack sharp. You can even look into the pupil of her eye and you can see the sky, you can see the light, and you can tell in some cases how light is being sort of modeled a bit with some shade overhead or bounce card underneath in order to make sure the right amount of light is on these subjects so that during the print all that detail can be brought out. But again, we can see their shadow here on her eyes. This area was clearly brought out to make it look that way. Now, another thing that was often done in darkroom printing, once the print was made, if it was necessary to lighten areas even more, they could go in and they could bleach these areas. They could paint bleach into these areas to brighten them. And in order to do that so that it would seem seamless, so that you can't necessarily tell it, you had to be very skilled. Again, these practitioners, these technicians, these printers were so good at what they were doing. And, you know, analog printing was the only way to do this kind of work. And so people were trained in this. It was a craft that is no longer as appreciated as it was. And there are way fewer people that know how to do this kind of work. So the fact that there are as many images in this show as there are, it's incredible. It's incredible to be able to see all of this. There's something about the commercial end that Avedon occupied that really talks about like the mechanics, the machine of producing images over and over again. In some cases, you know, these were commissions. In some cases, this is just Avedon going out and saying, I want to take a picture of you. I want to make a photograph of you. I want to make the image of you. I really like these two pictures side by side of self-portraits of Avedon at the Gagosian Gallery. So this is an early image. Looks like this is 1975 and this is 1993. Both 8x10 negatives, by the way. I mean, you know, it's a unique, often copied style that Avedon created. And it's not easy to make a picture like this where you're the one sitting in front of the camera and you're the one that's operating the camera. 8x10 negative, really narrow depth of field. It's super sharp right on his eyes, on his face. Yeah, it's a beautiful self-portrait. They're both great. An iconic image of Tina Turner. Here's another quick video, and you can see a couple things happening here. There's an image of Hillary Clinton directly in the center here. On the left, there's an image of Francis Bacon. It's an 8x10 image of Francis Bacon, and Avedon is in the frame. I want to point out that when I went on this day to see this exhibit again, when I walked in the door, Hillary Clinton was there, and it was pretty awesome. So then you've got these two, you know, this incredible diptych of Francis Bacon, and then you've got, you know, this sort of outtake of Avedon making a portrait of the two of them together. I really love the way Avedon uses the edge of the frame. There's always this, you know, yeah, we could say, okay, you know, it's referencing the outside of the frame, but I just love how they're like incidental thoughts that are coming in from the side of the frame. In this case, you know, it's him, but it's like a second version of the person, or you know, another idea of the person. Also, you know, these writers and painters and artists that he photographs, it's so interesting to see the ones that are kind of more aware of themselves. You know, like Bacon clearly had a sense of what he looked like and how he could be in front of the camera. But this too, these are darkroom prints. In this case, I think they're mounted to board and then framed. I mean, it's just a beautiful way of working with negatives, working with prints, understanding that these exposures can act as non-linear cinematic storytelling. Speaking of Avedon self-portraits, here's another self-portrait. This is one at the Met, And this kind of kicks off the Metropolitan Museum show. There's some wall text. These are two women that were sort of looking at this image of Avedon while they were reading the wall text. I love the fact that these self-portraits are included to give a sense of the individual who made the artworks. And he was elegant and thoughtful. He was highly determined. And whatever your take is on Avedon, whatever you think about Avedon, about the enormity of his work or the amount of his work that is prevalent in our popular culture, and how that potentially offsets your opinion of how much quality there is in Avedon. You can't really dispute the fact that he lived and breathed the medium in a way that no other photographer of his time really did. And if you read biographies about Avedon, if you read his notebooks, if you read firsthand accounts of what it's like meeting him and talking to him, being photographed by him, you know that this is somebody that's highly energetic and directed towards making something of enormity and importance. And I think both of these shows have done a really good job at kind of evoking what Avedon was interested in. I'm going to go through some of these installation shots from the Gagosian show. The lack of shadow on the backgrounds is such a huge thing, and normally I would say in order to get no shadow, you either have to have a very high light source, a very muted light source, or you have to have the background very far away from your subject and light it separately. We know that that's not the case, that in many cases they're very close to the white background, and I think a lot of these backgrounds are dodged so that they appear as bright as they do. Let's take a look at this video this is Gagosian's video for their install. It's so interesting that they're focusing on this Marilyn Monroe photograph, because while it's iconic, it couldn't be any less interesting to me as describing what Avedon does. Here are the two self-portraits I mentioned, some early work of his. His work with James Baldwin is remarkable. These portraits of Baldwin are really iconic. This is Ezra Pound. This image of Dovina with the elephants is also made up of two panels, by the way. They're seamless in this case, but there are two separate printed panels that are brought together to make that size. Oh, let's pause this for a minute. This famous image of Marilyn Monroe, but this image here of Oppenheimer is really a remarkable, telling, emotional portrait of him. Here it is. Charlie Chaplin, very unusual late life image of Charlie Chaplin. Again, he's using a lot of different techniques here. Could be 35 millimeter. Dizzy Gillespie, obviously Bob Dylan here. There's so many different types of images that he's made, different ways. I love this Avedon Baldwin sort of mask photograph that he makes. I mean, this man knew how to make a photograph. Also, so much of our, oh, these are good. Robert Frank, June Leaf. This image of Nureyev is kind of insane. Another Warhol's chest. This is William Casby. This is a really famous image of William Casby. Anyway, Salman Rushdie. these fashion works are incredible. Just even the grain on these pictures, but there's so much work done, so much dodging and burning, so much bleaching on the final image to make it look the way it is. They're so great. These are Picasso's children. It's Paloma and maybe. This is his father. I know I got that wrong. This image of Prince, Tina, so good. Politicians and diplomats. Here's the room that houses the American West images. It's cool to see this Charlize Theron image because I think Charlize Theron seems very contemporary. All right, I should probably cut this because it's long. Some early maquettes that were made for magazine pages. You know, Tom Ford's lucky he got photographed by Avedon, frankly. Yeah. So good. Is that Alan? I think it's Angelica Houston down there. Twiggy. You know, this exhibition, the many times I've been there, there's always filled with lots of different people. Ultimately, you know, he's a pop culture icon. A lot of people are in there to look at the fashion photographs. That's how they know Avedon. But it's really like the drama and the emotional weight of these images, these American West images, and the gravitas of these prints and presentation that draw me in and pull me back and act as, you know, really like, this is the kind of work that I want to make personally. This is the kind of like connection that I want to make with the images. And, you know, there's no real way to create a portrait that truly describes an individual, but to be able to collect onto film, in a print, some sort of emotional or psychological thought that's occurring at the moment of the exposure is really a exciting effort to make. I'm gonna wrap this up. The exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art is up till October 1st, I think, but you should check the website. The Gagosian show ends tomorrow, so if this even gets up in time, walk over to 21st Street and check it out. Nice to see you all. Have a good summer.